The information expressed in the following podcast is intended for educational purposes only and was created by and belongs solely to Believe Limited and the Flow podcast and does not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Please speak to your healthcare provider before making any medical decisions.
Women can and do have bleeding disorders. Yeah. It is not just based on the chromosomes. It is your bleeding symptoms that make it a bleeding disorder.
Hi, I'm Jessica, and welcome to Flow. I'm here like every month with the great Sarah Watson, sex therapist, and it's Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month. We're going to talk about it with Hanna, Beary, but first, we all want to know, how's your flow? That's how it goes. Okay.
Get it?
The music. Welcome once again to Flow. We have some great things to talk about. It's Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month. So real quick, checking in as we do to normalize the flow of hormones and menstruation that we all live through. Whether or not you're actively menstruating, we all live through a flow. I am currently ovulating. Feel great about it. I'm feeling good about it this round, yeah.
Good. I love that for you.
Thank you.
It's great.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like energy risen in that way. Like my hormones are a little bit more aligned. It's been painful the last couple of rounds, so I'm clocking that, but thankful for this one.
Welcome. Yeah. You had, yes, we talked about that because I was like, hey, you're in the club now. But I'm glad you're not this month. That's cool.
I don't know if it's sadistic of me or masochistic. I'm honored to be in the pain club. Honored to be here, you know.
Love it.
How is your flow?
I think I'm luteal. I think that's what's happening. I feel like my ovulation last time, this is interesting for us, is I had a tiny bit of blood when I ovulated this time.
Okay.
Which has not, it has happened before, but has not happened in a really long time. Because we're not TMI here, but when I was wiping, I was like, what is that? Like, and then it was like, oh, and then it takes that 10, not even 10 seconds, that 1 second to be like, oh, you ovulated. That's what's there. This is what happened. So that was interesting.
Is it totally normal?
Totally normal.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
We've talked about it.
It is normal.
Well, and because actually the act of ovulating is, it's growing a little cystic thing and releasing an egg. And so sometimes it shakes some menstrual blood loose, or is it ovulation blood? We should refer. What is it?
I don't want to say the wrong thing, but I think it's not menstrual blood because that would have been before, right? So
it tends to, it says online, look like a few drops of blood, and some people might be reddish or pink. Mm-hmm. It's when blood mixes with cervical fluids. But where is the blood from? Interesting. We're going to get back to that, I guess. Because I also, no TMO, I also had some ovulation bleeding.
See? Okay, it's normal. We just don't know where the blood's coming from. We should know this.
We've had clinicians I can cut to, like Dr. Holmes talking about it being normal, I think. You know what I mean?
So we get this peak of LH and then we ovulate about 24 or 48 hours later.
I feel like it's like ovulation blood. I don't know what it would, because it was bright. It was like new. It wasn't, because if it was menstrual blood, it would be darker because it had been in there.
Yeah, same.
Right, and I don't menstruate.
Well, and I feel like I've seen the graphic of, the active ovulation. It is a cyst, so it's almost like a cyst bursting, and it can like release some blood.
Right. Yeah.
I think
it's from the act of ovulation.
I did have that. This was my last month's ovulation, and I was also around when I was having sex. That shook loose some blood, which can happen.
Yeah. Also, totally normal. Very typical.
Love to hear it. It's also totally normal to get to hang out with the great Hanna, Beary. We have conversation to share from her, and we're going to get to it right after this quick break.
This ad is brought to you by Von Vendi, Von Willebrand Factor Recombinant.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I didn't always feel empowered to speak up for myself or ask for the care and support I needed. Becoming part of a community and hearing other people's experiences helped to change my perspective. That's why my deciding factor is making my voice heard. To hear my story and access other helpful resources, drop by Von Vendi, that's VONVENDI.com/patient-stories.
We are back, and Sarah and I are celebrating Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month. What a thing to have a whole month dedicated to the awareness. There's so many ins and outs of the experience of living with the bleeding disorders that comes up during this month. We talked to Hanna about some of it.
Hi, my name is Hanna Beary. I'm the Patient Advocacy Manager for Believe Limited, the prior Senior Program Manager at the Colorado chapter of the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation for 4.5 years. And before that, for 2 years, I served as the Executive Director for the Hemophilia of Iowa, now known as Bleeding Disorders of the Heartland chapter. Growing up, I always heard my mom talk about stories about my cousins. They were really close. And then throughout, the evolution of medicine, they had contaminated bad blood products. And so they all ended up passing away. From that, I saw, my cousins, their sisters decide to not have kiddos, and that really impacted me. And so after graduating college, my cousin at that time was serving on the board of directors for Hemophilia of Iowa. I'm looking for a job. She threw my name out there. And lo and behold, I became the executive director for Hemophilia of Iowa, now the Heartland of Bleeding Disorders. So I was shortly promoted to the executive director of the Bleeding Disorders of the Heartland, served in that role for about 2 years, and then I took the jump to Colorado and became the senior program manager there for about 4.5 years before transitioning to another opportunity.
Yeah. How did you learn about advocating for yourself? I mean, how were you exposed to that kind of advocacy work at first?
I've recently done some reflecting on this, especially with March being Women's History Month as well as Bleeding Disorders Awareness Month. And so I reflect back on my life, and my mom really is who showed me very unconsciously of what self-advocacy is. She did not take anything from anyone. Like, her voice was always heard. Whether I agreed or not, you heard it. But she also taught me that it's as important it is to advocate for myself, it's also just as important to advocate for the person next to me. Mom was Chris's #1 advocate, making sure that he was still able to live a life that fulfilled him. And even though it was a life cut short, I think it's still fair to say that he lived a full life while he could. And so that's kind of how I got started into it. But as a child, I was quiet. I was to myself. It was really college when I got involved with a group called Dance Marathon. It's a it's a student-run organization that raises funds for pediatric cancer. And so I had the opportunity to see some really heartbreaking things up close. But by the fundraising through myself, the advocacy I'm raising for pediatric cancer, really just shifted my entire perspective on life. So after graduating college, that's about when I started with the chapter, and I've been advocating for the bleeding disorders community ever since.
Hemophilia versus VWD, those are the two main bleeding disorders women might experience, platelet deficiency, factor deficiencies as well.
Yeah, that's the question. Gosh, you take us back the decades. If a woman were to have a bleeding disorder, it would be von Willebrand's disease. Von Willebrand's disease has kind of been dubbed the disease for women for bleeding disorders, which is entirely false. Men can have von Willebrand's disease. Let me say it again. Men can have von Willebrand's disease. Women can have hemophilia and other rare bleeding disorders. There's not necessarily a difference between a man or a woman having this genetic disorder. It really comes down to the genes you were given. And as we know, we don't choose our genes. They're given to us.
She gave us some great stats.
CDC research in a recent study, 1 in 4 women have a bleeding disorder that's undiagnosed. It's really crazy to think the amount of women who are still underdiagnosed with a bleeding disorder. Nearly 1% of America's population, 1% of women of America's population has a bleeding disorder, but usually are undiagnosed. In the same survey through the CDC between 2012 and 2020, I believe that women seen in the treatment center and hemophilia treatment centers across the nation increased 47%, which is roughly how many thousands?
28,000?
Roughly 28,000 women who were seen in a hemophilia treatment center to receive care.
So just like the severe awe, the shock, the awe of how many menstruators are living with a bleeding disorder right now and could be using factor treatment, could be using other forms of, treatment.
Or on the flip side, I mean, my goodness, that's so many women who, one, it's wonderful, the 28,000, they won the battle, they got a diagnosis and a treatment plan. Like, that's the goal. But now all of those other women, how many of those women have had a forced hysterectomy? Or, like those troubles that a bulk of the women out there are still facing.
When treatment could be an option. It's not so that it is an option right now. It's not sitting around and they just have to claim it. It's hard work to get to the treatment.
Yeah.
But if there's that many people who need it, who were banded together seeking it, perhaps the needle would move a little faster.
Change happens with the bottom up. It takes the grassroots advocacy and people with the like-minded issues to really come together and make that change happen. Because if we stay quiet, the issue is going to stay quiet. And as grandma, great-grandma's time, they were always hushed. Like, women were hushed no matter the problems they were having. And my mom, she wasn't hushed, but there were times she was still hushed. I mean, she had taught me to talk about my issues and in my menstrual cycle, but she didn't. She was taught the opposite. And so we have to take our generation, the next generation, and we have to push the hole in this issue because it's there. And if we don't push it, who is?
And our way of pushing it is continuing to talk about it. And luckily, there's people who have been working on understanding some of the medical, understanding the true interaction and like human need to communicate, who are doing the work to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it can start, if anyone's ever curious, Better You Know campaign. You can Google it. It'll bring you up to a survey you can take. And that is a tool built to help you to take it to a hematologist or your primary care physician to begin the testing and get your diagnosis.
To empower you to ask for what you need, which is testing to lead you to treatment that could lead to a better quality of life.
And if you hear you're a symptomatical carrier, ask for a new doctor. You have that right.
Drop the mic, Hanna Beary. Yeah, break a board.
Yeah.
What if you just
a cement block.
Yeah. This whole table. I'm going to find that footage and we're going to cut to it, just so you know.
I bet it's on my Facebook somewhere.
Yeah.
That was my proudest moment.
It was phenomenal.
Fantastic.
In the CDC report that was mentioned, it says that it's estimated that 1 in 5 girls and women experience, or menstruators, 1 in 5 menstruators experience heavy menstrual bleeding. And among those, 1 in 4 have a bleeding disorder.
Wow.
Thoughts? That does seem that's a fourth of menstruators.
I think, one, that's a lot of people. Let's just honor that. It's a lot of people. I think, two, I've shared before, I always, when I have clients that come in or even friends or whatever, I did this the other night at a dinner with 5 other therapists, and we were talking about menstrual cycles, of course, as one does, and talked about like, wait, how much do you bleed? Right? Because I get on my little high horse right away and be like, oh, it's normal. Wait, what do you mean? And I'm like, wait, tell me more. And I get into that question of like, wait, does your mom bleed like that? Does your aunt? Does your sister? Who in your family does? And that has led a handful of people to go get tested. So if you're talking about it as much as we talk about it, make sure you're asking people like, what's going on in their family? Because it's not normal.
Yeah, the investigation questions, it's not just a gimmick. We need people to ask, how's your flow? And answer it honestly for yourself,
Correct.
for the people around you.
Right.
Compare stories, check in. It is essential. 1 in 4 women. So right now, think of 3 to 4 pals and give them a call and ask how their menstruation's been going. Seriously.
Right. And like, let's check on that. Yeah. We have tools for that. Hence our last several episodes.
That's right. That's right. It's important to track. It's
Right.
important to pay attention. Why is it important to pay attention? Because you're not paying attention, catastrophes can happen. As we have Hannah
Yep.
talking a bit about the bad blood incident.
My mom rode motorcycles, and
Whoa.
she was a race car driver for a while. She was a
Epic.
wild lady, and I take after her, very much so. But her stories would always consist with my cousin Chris being involved. Chris and my mom rode motorcycles together, and whenever she'd get back in with Chris, my great Aunt Pat, Chris's mom, would not be happy. And then the week to follow, he was just deathly ill, losing weight, pale skin, and really struggling for life. And as soon as they fell ill, it happened really quick. So the bad blood crisis, the contaminated products really left an impact on so many people.
So I want to review that stat. We want to review that stat, right? That the HIV infection
Yes.
was estimated 50% of all those with hemophilia became infected, including around 90% of those with severe hemophilia. That's that nuance of that statistic. Thousands of people with hemophilia developed AIDS and died from the disease. And many others from that era still live with HIV today.
Yes, and hepatitis C. Like let's
Thank you.
talk about that too, right? So the blood product was infected with not only HIV but also hepatitis C, which is an incredibly difficult thing to treat. I have mentioned before on our show that I lost my grandfather to this. I lost my uncle. He died at the age of 13. And I have watched many other friends and colleagues pass away, those people that were influential when I was a kid, and then watch my friends go through treatment for hepatitis and my aunt go through it, and how awful this treatment can be. Was really, really, really difficult for them. And just even as an outsider watching them go through that treatment was very alarming and very scary. So really important thing to think about.
It's important to discuss the history of the community and to make sure that advocating is going on, because a lack of awareness from the government, from organizations. I mean, can we talk about the bad blood incident? Hannah shared some, but it was a generation of people, as you've referred to, Sarah, that were impacted.
Yeah.
And what?
Yeah, we lost a lot of people, right? Like people were just wiped out. The whole, I don't know if I've shared this. I feel like I have shared it, but like quick throwback. My best friend's dad used to be Jessica Foley's dad.
Just Foley MD.
Dr. Foley.
Dr. Foley, yes.
And so I went to this hemophilia summer camp, and Sarah was working there, and we've just been besties ever since.
Yay. Her dad was our camp director in the 70s at Camp Bold Eagle, the oldest hemophilia camp in the country. Then he watched everyone get infected and get sick, and he thought camp just didn't happen again because he thought everyone died. But camp happened. And then fast forward through lots of other things. Dr. Jessica Foley landed at hemophilia camp because she remembered the name Camp Bold Eagle. But it was that severe where Steve Foley thought that those people were gone, that they died because they were dying.
Well, you're saying the people that he knew at camp, the people he had.
Yeah. And if you talk to people, which there's only a handful left of that generation, those people are gone. Like their cohort at camp, like I think about it as like my age group at camp, but the cohort at camp there's 2 people left from that generation or 3 people left. And they just didn't, if they made it through a while, they still ended up passing due to complications later.
And everyone is left with a mistrust, a guard up, as you've put it.
Yeah. And this may not be everyone else's experience in the community, and I totally honor your experience, listeners. But as a young child, watching my grandfather die, watching my uncle die, watching my aunt be infected, and then having friends later from hemophilia camp be infected and get sick, I have a high distrust of some of the people and organizations and companies that put out these medications. I am very diligent about really doing research and trying to understand if I need to take care of my body, which I do. What am I using? What are they doing? What is the protection? And even though there is this veil of we are doing everything we can to keep this community protective, there's a little part of me that's like, really? Really? Because y'all still make money off of us.
Yes, which is part of a larger conversation of insurance and medical and healthcare, both in this country and at large. But back into the specifics of what there is to mistrust, you mentioned its product itself. To have a guard up when dealing with product sounds reasonable, sounds healthy. We talk about menstruators having a guard up before you put something like cotton in to absorb your menses. Check on what your cup is made of. Consider what you're putting in your body. There's also to be what you're putting in your bloodstream. That's the product we're talking about, factor, right? And other medical treatments for bleeding disorders.
Right. Absolutely. And I think we can also we can take a step out of the community and look at how many times have you heard of recalls for any medication, right? Or maybe it's food, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like salmonella outbreak.
In
like we
spinach.
have to we're looking at
Right.
Exactly.
So staying aware.
There goes my organic spinach. Exactly. Stay aware of what you're putting into your body, both as protection, right? And nutrition. So I will say I will always have a little bit of my guard up just due to our history. And I love our community so dearly. And I always, not always, but, throw back every once in a while. What would it be like if that generation of people was still here?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What would it have been like had I grown up with that uncle, right? Or the grandfather, stuck around until he was well aged and not really young.
And for those who may be listening as menstruators, but may not know the details of what's going on right now in our Awareness Month to talk about history, what's a documentary or movie they might go watch?
So you want to head over to Netflix and watch Bad Blood, not to be confused with Taylor, because we love her too.
I'm just going to put the music right here. So just
we can. No, we love her, but there is a whole documentary about what happened and how the blood product, which was used in the 70s and 80s, got contaminated with HIV and hepatitis C. And spoiler, the government knew.
Awareness. So hold on. It wasn't a lack of awareness. Maybe it was a lack of awareness that created the contamination, but then they knew and continued to ship out that product?
Yes.
So that seems like something that would have recourse. Maybe people would respond to that in some way once that does come to light. I know there's some names we might talk about. Yeah, and they did, and acts in response to it.
But yeah, there was recourse and there were advocates. And I think within our community, we are all well aware of Ryan White. And maybe also, I hope you're all aware of Ricky Ray.
In 1998, the Ricky Ray Relief Bill was passed, which was really wonderful. It provided, it took acknowledgement that the government knew what was going on. And at the time, it's really sad to think about, but so did national organizations, and they turned their nose to it. And that's also admitted with them. They understand where they went wrong, and that's why they have such the desire and belief to do better, because 90% of severe hemophiliacs died. They're gone, and they're never coming back, which it's really heartbreaking to think about.
And the contamination was known.
The contamination was known for years and covered up for years before families and the grassroots efforts. So again, people closest to it raising their voice and not backing down. So the Ricky Ray Relief Act was passed in 1998, which pretty much took acknowledgement of the government's fault and provided financial assistance to families who lost loved ones during that time.
Wow. Okay, so there's a need to stay aware of legislation that can help with retribution, with protecting such a thing from occurring again, requiring new laws that mean contamination can't be covered up. I mean, I assume that was already illegal, right? Like this was a hugely devastating illegal thing that happened.
Yeah. A whole different bucket is what happened to those factor products once the government was just like, oh, you're right, these are contaminated. We can't use them in America. But you know who can use them? Other countries. So I'm not as educated on this subject, but there has been a long time lawsuit between, I believe it's European countries and America, because of the known distribution of contaminated products.
It is wild.
It's so sad.
So nuts that someone can check a box that makes that they can say that's okay. So going back to, like you mentioned, the Ricky Ray Act legislation, but also activist organizations and their foundational years, and specifically within, we're on a menstrual health show, women's activism and those who create space for more women's conversations to happen. What do you know that you can share with me about that?
I think within our community, we are all well aware of Ryan White. And maybe also, I hope you're all aware of Ricky Ray, who was a brother, also had two younger brothers, I believe. I can't remember where he was in the lineup, but all of the brothers contracted HIV and most likely hepatitis, and were advocating for better treatment and not to be bullied and condemned and not being able to go to school because of their HIV status. And very similar to Ryan's advocacy as well. And so there was a Ricky Ray Relief Act in 1998, I believe, right? And that's where the government finally decided to take responsibility. And again, this is all in the Bad Blood doc.
Copy.
And decided to put a dollar amount on each person who contracted HIV. And it was a mere $100,000 per person.
Okay, so the government was like, the blood is contaminated. We were aware of it. We shipped it out. So now here's $100K for your troubles of being infected by this deadly disease because of our awareness that you would be.
Right.
And
right.
I have here, the Ricky Ray Fund provides for compassionate payments of $100K to eligible individuals with blood clotting disorders such as hemophilia who were treated with anti-hemophilic factor at any time during the period of 1982 to 1987. All right. For a period of about 5 years, people who contracted HIV because of this contaminated supply of drugs were just given $100K? That's how it worked? They were just like, oh, here you go?
No.
How'd it work?
And I will say in 1998, I was 16, 15. So I watched this happen from the standpoint of being a granddaughter of the woman who was going to be compensated for losing her husband and her child.
They mandated a single payment of $100K from the fund to any individual infected with HIV if the individual had the disorder and was treated with blood clotting agents. Okay. What I'm looking for, was right. How did they get involved? How did they have to sign up? Of course. But what I was getting to was that there was other options? Like they had an option to sign up to get this fee or not?
Right. Yeah. So the option was you sign up, you get the money, right? After you provide proof.
That you have.
Which that's a whole other, right.
Proof of your diagnosis.
You had to provide. Yeah. Documentation. Right. So that's why it's really important, y'all, to document every time you take Factor. Every time.
That's why it's important to not just for your own knowledge of when you've put medicine in your body, but to keep track of which lot of medicine you're putting in your body.
Which lot? What's the number? What's the date? How much did you take? All of that jazz. Right. And so you had to prove that. Right. And then you were able and eligible for the funds and they were sent to you. And or you didn't do that. And there were some people that didn't do that and sued the government because they are well worth more than $100,000 their life was. And we don't have the stats of how many people did that because that's private. But it is known within the community that some did that and they won.
Wow.
And they won.
So some lives in the end were doled out a certain amount and other lives that fought for a bit more may have gotten more, which is a larger issue with how things seem to be run in capitalistic America. But that's not what this podcast is about.
That's our other podcast
Yeah.
eventually.
It is about acknowledging that, again, what is left from this atrocity is a mistrust. And then as a woman who also we know that there is a cyclical, not cyclical, but a repeated dismissal of women's pain as not validated in medical diagnostic processes. So coming at it as a woman with a bleeding disorder, figuring out how to work with a clinician team has got to be hard.
Yeah, it is, right? And I know we've talked about this before, and I've shared many times that I went to multiple treatment centers to get fully diagnosed.
Right.
Because as a woman with a bleeding disorder who would show up with giant bruises, or, we've talked about me missing school because of the amount of blood draining from my nose consistently throughout elementary school, and having data to back it up, like, oh, no, you're just a symptomatic carrier. What? No. So finally, after bouncing around, mistrusting these other doctors, finally got the full diagnosis, finally have the treatment I need. Love my hematologist. Thank you so much. I love her so much.
So the right people are out there. The right providers are out there. You got to find them. You got to keep advocating for oneself. And it is better to know what's going on in one's body than to not know, which is the name of the campaign Hanna talked to us about.
There's also a campaign developed in partnership with the CDC and the National Bleeding Disorders Foundation called The Better You Know. This is an online tool that really just walks you through. You can click, you're a man, you're a woman. What kind of bleeding do you experience? How often do you experience? Does your period look like this? And at the end, it'll say, you have an X amount percentage of having a bleeding disorder. We recommend you going to get checked.
Okay.
And then it'll also give you resources of places in your area where you can get checked. So the Better You Know campaign is a really great resource for women, especially, to take this quick online survey. And then now you kind of have data to show your primary care physician or a hematologist that, hey, look, like, this isn't normal. Like, this is a different third-party resource through the CDC who says this isn't normal.
So it's about, as a patient looking for a diagnosis or beginning to maybe discover that a diagnosis might be possible and treatment might be possible, a good first step is to go where to be able to answer this survey?
It's called The Better You Know.
Better You Know.
Yeah.
So we'll Google that. We'll include that in the links, of course. And folks can go find out and then be empowered with that to go into the doctor's office. So, right, finding a diagnosis. Where do you start? This sounds like a great place to start. And it's put together by NBDF, previously NHF.
Yes. National Bleeding Disorders Foundation.
That's it.
Rolls off the tongue.
It does. NBDF. NBDF. We're going to link to this in the show notes. NBDF becomes like an interesting... What language is it where it's all consonants pushed together? I'm trying to picture it. Like,
I don't know, but we just created a new one, I think.
For us. Yes. Menstrual Awareness Society.
Flowage. It's flowage.
Flowage. That's the language we speak. Yes. So the Better You Know, we recommend checking it out. Hanna told us some great things about it. There's also Victory for Women, an organization from NBDF. They are an initiative to create and support education and resources for women and providers in the community to be aware of what's going on in menstruating bodies that also are coping with a bleeding disorder.
I stay calm because they shouldn't have to. Community members who are being forced with this reality on the daily, they do not need to stay calm. We are passionate about what we're doing, and it's passion for the right to receive access to proper treatment and care. And that is what is not happening for many women across the nation and almost all women in other countries. So the first important thing is to getting that diagnosis is access to proper care. And when I say that, I really mean hemophilia treatment centers. The second is that then it comes to having that doctor who's going to actually acknowledge your needs. I've worked with community members who have saved their used tampons and pads to bring into their physician just to get the point across. Women should not have to go through these standards and almost feel belittled and dehumanized by bringing in such products just to get a point across that, hey, I bleed, and I bleed a lot. So about the average time, there was a study done by the CDC in partnership with hemophilia treatment centers. I believe the study ran from 2012 to 2020, and it was collecting the average time for a woman from the onset bleeding symptoms to actual diagnosis. For an adult woman, the median is 10 years. The highest stat I saw was 16 years to get a proper diagnosis for an adult woman. For youth, the average median is 4 years for that diagnosis. And again, with women, things fluctuate. Again, our hormones can fluctuate, those factor levels. There's a different factor level threshold for women to men to receive that diagnosis. Women are so used, I can't even tell you the amount of women, and sometimes even youth, as young as 16-year-old women, who tell me I'm a symptomatical carrier. And I take a moment to myself to breathe it through. And then I ask them, what does that mean to you, a symptomatical carrier? Can you share with me and elaborate some of those things that you are experiencing? And then can you give me any differences between a man in your life who is experiencing the same things? The biggest difference being is that they have the same bleeding problems, but the man has a treatment plan and the woman does not.
Which leads me to, how do you stay calm when dealing with this kind of advocacy work, which does seem important in order to get your point across, right, in these settings in Washington days. But that's a pretty disturbing reality that you just painted.
It is really disturbing. And in a large manner, I'm still a third-party perspective. These stories that I share are ones that I've helped other people work through. And how do I stay calm? I stay calm because they shouldn't have to. Community members who are being forced with this reality on the daily, they do not need to stay calm because, my God, their world is turned upside down. They are bleeding for 28 days straight with maybe a day in between. We are passionate about what we're doing, and it's passion for the right to receive access to proper treatment and care. And that is what is not happening for many women across the nation. And almost all women in other countries.
Yes, well said. Yes. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
It's crazy. It's so crazy.
It's nuts. I appreciate what you're saying about speaking for others, staying calm for others. We were also speaking out there about like passion and anger and like to do something with it is good, to focus on being calm, to be in those places, even with people who are suffering and have to say, are you a symptomatic carrier or do you have this symptom that needs a diagnosis? To communicate that is so important. So thank you for coming on Flow to do some of that. I'm sure we're going to have more conversations ahead. It was incredible to talk to Hanna. It's so important to become aware of one's own body. We have some amazing guests coming up in coming months on Flow, and we want to hear from you. Check out our show notes for a link to our Calendly. Record a story with us. Let us know how you're flowing. We actually, genuinely, have an actual question. How is your flow? Flow is produced by Bloodstream Media. Big shout out to our creative director, Amy Board, and to our editor, Alex Watson. New episodes will be available the second Thursday of every month.
Hey, that's the day after I start menstruating.